Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point. This is part 2 of our Kill Team Morok breakdown. In part 1, we talked about the blooded kill team, the traitor guard, whatever you want to call them. And here in part 2, we're going to be talking about the Phobos strike team, which is basically it's our first Space Marine themed specialist team. I'm surprised it took us this long. And it is basically, it's infiltrators, it's incursors, you can have reavers, and it's honestly, I gave it crap initially because I said it seemed from the surface, it seemed boring. But I think on the table and the way that they play, they're actually a very interesting, very cool team with a lot of tricks and a lot of tools. So I guess to start, the strike team itself, it's an elite team. Obviously, it comes with a leader and 5 operatives. Well, the box comes with 10 operatives, but when you're making the team, it's going to be a 6-model team, including the leader. And the archetypes are infiltration, recon, and seek and destroy. And we'll get into what is optimal there later once we talk about the faction tac ops. But like I said, it's there's options for infiltrators, incursors, and reavers. And since there's not a ton of options, I figured we can just kind of go over them one at a time. But before I do that, I want to talk about their special abilities and actions, of which there are a few. This team is, before I say anything else, they are very deep. There is a lot to unpack here for an elite team, where if you look at the compendium infiltrators or incursors, it's like about as simple as it gets almost. It's so basic. It's so easy that like when I'm recommending somebody like learn the game or demo, I would recommend they play like Compendium Incursors or Compendium Infiltrators. But this team, the Phobos, they are very complex. There's a lot to do. So they've got a whole page of actions and abilities that are special to them. And the first one I want to talk about is Guerrilla Warfare, because that's right at the top. So Guerrilla Warfare is an ability that every single model gets on the Phobos team. It's a 1 AP action, and it just lets you change the operative's order. So basically, the way that you're going to use this, and the only limitation is you can't do it on the first turning point, which is really important. And you can't do it when you're within 6 inches of an enemy operative. So this is basically, you're never going to use it to change to engage, I don't think. That seems pointless to me. But you will use it at as you're a 3 APL team, you might use it a lot of the time as your third action to switch back to conceal, because after the first turn, when you activate, you can switch to engage. You might shoot, switch to conceal, or maybe you'll move, shoot, switch to conceal, or something like that. So it's a way to let you do something and shoot, or shoot twice and go back to safety afterwards, which is really cool. Not a lot of teams have this at all. No team has this as an ability. Some teams have it as like a ploy, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a very powerful, very interesting ability. And then next up is Omni Scrambler, which in my opinion is the best thing about this team. And I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. It is a very, very powerful ability. So it's not an action that you do, but it's something that you do in the strategic phase. So I'll just break it down for you. So basically, once in each strategic phase, when it's your turn to use a strategic ploy, if you have any infiltrators, because infiltrators are the only thing on this team that have the Omni Scrambler ability. If you have any infiltrators, you can use Omni Scrambler as if it was a free strategic play, basically. And basically, you select one enemy operative that is visible to any of your infiltrators. And then during that turn, that enemy operative, basically, first of all, they're treated as having a GA1 in case you picked a GA2 model, which I don't know why you really ever would. But they cannot be activated until either a number of enemy operatives have been activated equal to the number of friendly infiltrators with or on your team have gone. So usually, spoiler alert, you're going to have either 4 or 5, maybe even 6 infiltrators on your kill team. So that's pretty good. Or if it's the last enemy operative to be activated. So basically, in the strategic phase, you pick an enemy model that one of your infiltrators can see, and you say you can't go until like 4 or 5 of your models have gone first. and that is extremely good. So it's kind of like the Fog of Dreams that the Shadow Seer has,
Yes.
except it's free. You do it in the strategic phase, and like you always roll like a 4 or 5, unless you've got like dead infiltrators. Then, but even then, I mean, it's later in the game. Hopefully, you've killed some of their guys too. So this is an extremely good thing. So what this does is really like a lot of the time people say that like losing initiative on the later turns is really bad, and it is. But with Omni Scrambler, say like you lose initiative turn 2 and there's like one major play that you're worried about your opponent doing, you can kind of just like shut it off and take away the advantage of having initiative for them, unless they have like multiple huge, go first kind of plays. But I think Omni Scrambler is really, really good, and it stops like that. It stops one of the big negatives of losing initiative, which is one of the big things that's out of your control in this game normally. So I love Omni Scrambler.
Yeah.
Moving on, there's the multi-spectrum array, which is just kind of a passive ability that the incursors on your team are going to have. You basically treat obscurity a little bit differently when determining if an intended target is in this operative's line of sight. It has to be more than 4 inches or 2 circle away from heavy cover to be considered obscured. And if they're using smoke grenades, which most teams don't, but you might run into it. Smoke grenades just don't work against teams or operatives with the multi-spectrum array ability. So that's pretty interesting. And then next up is Saboteurs, which is a 1 AP ability that any operative other than the Saboteur or Minelayer, which we'll get into later, can do. The only usefulness of this is related to a faction tack up. So when we talk about the faction tack up, we'll come back to the Saboteur ability. And then there's Terror, which is a Reaver ability. Basically, it's a 1 AP action where you create like a bubble around the Reaver that did it, where if enemy operatives want to do a mission action or a pickup action, it's going to cost 1 more APL for them to do it if they're within 3 inches of that Reaver that did the Terror ability. And at the end of the turn, when determining control of an objective marker, that any friendly operatives perform this action during the turning point or within range of, they treat enemy operatives' total APL as being 1 less. So if like there's 3 guardsmen there that would normally be 2 APL each, it would be 2, 4, 6 APL. Instead, you count those 3 as being 5 APL total. So pretty interesting, pretty cool abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess we'll talk a little bit quickly about the ploys that they have before I get into the specialists themselves. So obviously you have Bolter Discipline. Everybody should know how this works at this point. You shoot twice with bolt weapons, 1 CP strategic play. Shock Assault, same thing, but for fighting, you get to fight twice. There is Vanguard, which is a very interesting 1 CP play. Basically, you get to ignore the distance, the first circle of distance for climb, drop, or traverse. That's really useful. You get to ignore, that. Basically, if you're traversing over a barricade or something, you're not moving 4 inches, you're moving 6. It automatically passes jump tests, which is super niche and is almost never going to come up. And it adds 1 inch to the movement characteristic. So your 6-inch move is now a 7-inch move, and your 8-inch charge is now a 9-inch charge. So this is helpful. I actually don't think you're going to be using it super often, just because these are all 3 APL models that are move dashing potentially. So usually don't need that extra movement, but it's nice to have. And then the last strategic play is And They Shall Know No Fear, which I really like. When I played this team, I found myself using it quite a bit. Basically, you ignore any modifiers to your operatives, any APL modifiers, that is, and they are not treated as injured ever. So I think both of these are super helpful, and I really like using it. As far as tactical plays go, there is Stealth Assault, which basically it's really interesting when you activate a Phobos model that has a conceal order. You can switch its order to engage and charge and fight. And because you have Stealth Assault up, you can strike twice before the enemy operative gets to respond. So this is kind of nice in the sense that a lot of your models are just going to be hitting with fists. So you're not super good in melee, but having Stealth Assault is good. And if you want to pop it on a Reaver, you could be doing a lot of unanswered damage, which I think is really cool. Worth noting that if you have Stealth Assault popped, you can't shoot. But generally speaking, if you're using it for melee anyway. So there is that. Transhuman Physiology is great. It's the same as it is in the Compendium. You can turn a critical save or a normal save when you're getting shot at into a critical save. That's really helpful. There's one step ahead, which lets you basically, after you see what your opponent's kill team is, you can use this ploy and basically swap out a model. I think this is the first time we've seen this from any kill team so far in this edition. And then Elite Reconnaissance basically is a 1 CP redeploy for 2 models at the end of the scouting step. So after you figure out which team has, or which team is going to have initiative on turn 1, you can go ahead and redeploy a couple of your models. This is something that the Corsairs have that I think is really strong. If you're given initiative, potentially, let's say you're the defender and they win the scouting step and give you initiative, you can use Elite Reconnaissance and you can redeploy. And alternatively, you can also, instead of redeploying, you can select and resolve an additional scouting option. And this is after you've done your first one. So the potential to do 2 scouting choices is pretty interesting as well. You can like dash a guy out of line of sight. So yeah, that's all their plays. And I think they're all pretty useful. This team has a pretty deep toolbox before you even look at the specialists. So yeah, I mean, with that said, let's get into the specialist because there's a few of them. So there's the Commsman. So this is interesting, and this is something that really threw me off the first time I played this team, is it's a comm specialist, but it doesn't work the same way. And this is an infiltrator. So this works towards your Omni Scrambler, I should say. And it's a comm specialist that doesn't work the same way as all the other comm specialists in the game. So instead of giving a model an APL, when it's the Commsman's turn and they use the comms array ability action, they choose another Phobos model that is visible to them, and that Phobos model can perform a free 1 AP action, even though it's the Commsman's activation. They can't perform anything that it's already done this turn, or an action where it moves. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. Like if a model's standing on a point and it moved and shot twice or something, you can have the commsman later on, like, hey, like order them to tap that objective, for instance. And there's a lot of different like 1 AP actions that the Phobos have access to throughout their specialists that I'll get into once we get to those. But this is really interesting. I think it's actually very good, but it's going to take some getting used to if you're seeing a comm spec basically, and it doesn't have an ability to give another model +1 APL. Very weird. There's the Helix Adept, which is basically it's like a medic. It has a revive ability like all the other medics. If you're within 3 inches of a friendly operative that gets killed by a shooting attack, you can keep it alive, and it doesn't die. It keeps D3 wounds remaining instead of just 1, which is nice. Actually, I should go back on this, because unlike all the other medics, this one actually can save a model that was incapacitated, regardless of whether or not it was a shooting attack. So even if it's killed in melee, it can be revived by the medic, which is really interesting because all the other revive abilities do not work this way. And then it gets to perform a free dash action, but it must finish within 1 inch of the Helix Adept. And you subtract 1 from both operatives' APL. But I want to say, if you use the And They Shall Know No Fear strategic play, where you ignore any or all modifiers to APL, you can ignore that -1 from the medic when it revives. So that's really cool. And It's got a Helix Gauntlet, which is basically if you're within 1 inch of a friendly operative, you can use the Helix Gauntlet to regain 2d3 lost wounds on that operative. You just can't do it on a model that was revived this turn. So, yeah. And obviously, these are both the models I've talked about so far. They're infiltrators, so they have marksman bolt carbines with lethal 5. It's just a bolt gun with lethal 5, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else super special about that. Next up is the Saboteur, which is it's another infiltrator, and it's got remote explosives, which is, if you're familiar with a demo specialist, it is basically the same thing. This model is the same thing as the demo specialist with a couple key differences. When it plants explosives, unlike the demo spec from Vetguard, it doesn't get to do a free dash away. Now, you might think this is kind of balanced out by the fact that you have 3 APL, so you can move, plant the explosives, and dash away. But there's no way for you to move, plant the explosives, and detonate it with a shoot action in the same turn without getting caught in the explosion as well, because you can't get 4 APL. The only way to do this really is to like move, for instance, plant the mine, and then dash away for 3 APL, but then you don't blow it up. But maybe in like your next activation, you can have your commsman order the Saboteur to do the detonate ability, which basically is a shoot action.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the demo spec, but it's not as much of like a 1-2 punch where it all happens at once. And so I think the Saboteur is kind of being used more defensively, maybe, or like setting up a play that you know can't really be stopped. But it's just going to take 2 activations to do it, rather than one big explosion. Unless, of course, you're willing to blow up your own Saboteur, which a lot of the time you might be willing to do that because he's tanky and the explosion is going to hit anything within 3 inches. And if you want him to just go nuts and blow himself up, then that is certainly an option that I think once in a while might be valid. But moving on, let's talk about the Infiltrator Veteran, which is one of my favorite models here. It is an infiltrator, but he doesn't have the normal marksman bolt carbine with lethal 5. He has the custom bolt carbine that has, when you go look at the special rules, it says custom. So custom basically says if this operative is selected for deployment, so you do this when you pick him on the team, not when you put him on the roster, you select up to 2 of the following special rules or critical hit rules, which is balanced, lethal 5, no cover, mortal wound 1, P1, or rending. So you pick 2 of those. I'm just going to say right now, lethal 5, that should just be one of them, always. Lethal 5 is really good. So what the other one is going to be is really going to depend on the matchup. So sometimes you might want no cover. Sometimes you might want balanced. Sometimes you might want P1 if you're against like an elite team and you only want the AP. And sometimes you might want rending. I don't know. I mean, this is a really cool one, but for sure, you're always going to take that lethal 5. And then it's also got a combat blade. So 4 attacks on 3s, damage 3/5. So it's got a little bit better melee than the fists of the other infiltrators. Yeah, I think the Infiltrator Veteran is going to be an auto take. So look out for that model. Next up, we got the VOXBREAKER, Infiltrator VOXBREAKER. So his thing basically is he has the VOXBREAK ability, where while an enemy operative is within 6 inches of him, if he's used the VOXBREAK ability, it can't reroll. That's basically it. It can't do rerolls. It's kind of like the Sicarian Infiltrator ability that the Hunter Clade has access to. And then, of course, the Infiltrator VOXBREAKER also has the Auspex scan ability. So you select one enemy operative with a conceal order within 6 inches of this operative. Then you'll select a friendly Phobos visible to and within 3 inches of the VOXBREAKER, which can be the VOXBREAKER because it doesn't say one other. And then until the end of the turning point, that friendly operative treats that enemy operative as if it has an engage order. This is cool, except for the fact that you need to be within 6 inches of the enemy operative. I don't love that very
Yeah.
much. If it was like not, if it didn't have that qualifier of the within 6 inches, I would like it a lot more. But yeah, not blown away by it, but it is an option. And then there's just the basic infiltrator warrior after that. And then you get into the infiltrator sergeant, which is just an infiltrator that hits on twos and with his marksman bolt carbine, and then all of the leaders that we're going to get into have a special action called strategize for 1 AP, where you just gain a CP. The only limitation is you can't do it within 6 inches of an enemy. I love this. This is a great
Mhm.
thing that your comms could like look at your sergeant and tell him to strategize. So you just gain a CP. It's going to be really easy to have 4 CP on like turn 1, or like basically 2 CP generated per turn because of the strategize ability. And then we got the Incursor Marksman, which I think is one of the other auto takes on this team. He's got a Stalker Marksman Bolt Carbine that hits on twos, that has AP1 and lethal 5, and 3-4 damage, of course, because it's a bolt gun. This is very good, but it's also got the track target ability. So basically, it's a 1 AP action, and this is one of the most unique things about this team. It's a 1 AP action that this model only can do, where basically once you select track target, this counts as a shooting attack. So if you've already shot, you can't do track target unless you have bolter discipline up, basically. And anytime an enemy operative performs an action, you can interrupt that action with the marksman who used track target and perform a free shoot action against it. Or I guess it's technically it's treated as an Overwatch action, so you'll be -1 to hit, so hitting on 3s instead of 2s with this model. And it basically, it's like an interrupt. So if a model is move dashing and you can see that enemy operative, you can interrupt between the move dash and just shoot it. So this is a really powerful ability where you can kind of like use track target when this guy's like pointing at a big like an objective or like a big stretch of like open area. And if any enemy operatives walk in that area, you can stop them and get a free shot on them. This is a really interesting thing, especially for an elite team that is normally worried about getting kind of out activated. So big fan of the Incursor Marksman
Mhm.
track target ability. Very unique stuff. There's the Incursor Minelayer, who is allowed to plant a haywire mine within 1 inch of where he is. And then basically, the first time an enemy operative moves within 3 inches of the haywire mine, you make a shooting attack against that operative with the haywire mine profile, which is 4 shots on twos, damage 2-4 with lethal 5, no cover. And it's got the proximity roll, which basically just says you shoot with it at that point. And then it's got stun, which stun is actually kind of useless because if it's happening during their activation when they're moving and you're stunning them in the middle of their activation, that modifier, it's not going to affect the amount of actions they have. It's just going to affect what their APL is treated as during their activation, which is going to go away at the end of their activation. So they kind of need to like FAQ stun on the haywire mine, because as is right now, it's almost useless unless they want to like tap a point after they get hit by the haywire mine, which I guess could happen sometimes. But stun is not going to be useful because normally when you stun a model, it's during your activation and it's going to affect them when they go next. But if they're getting stunned during their own activation, do you see where I'm going with this? Does
Yeah.
this make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of useless. So maybe that gets fixed. But that's basically what the Incursor Minelayer does. And then you got the regular Incursor Warrior, which I'll never take. The Incursor Sergeant, which I don't think you'll ever take. And then you got the Reavers. The Reavers are better than Compendium Reavers because they have the Terror ability, first of all, which I went over earlier. And their combat knife has 5 attacks that do damage 4/5 instead of 3/4. So they're immediately much better in melee than their compendium counterparts. I kind of like the Reaver Sergeant as a leader because you've got so many like specialists that you want to take. I don't think you want to take a normal Reaver. So if you're going to take a Reaver, I would prefer it to be the Sergeant because um, he, first of all, having that bolt pistol that's AP1, the special issue bolt pistol, hitting on 2s is really nice. Just having like a chonky melee guy with 13 wounds and that hits on 2s with his combat knife and his pistol, I think is really cool. Big fan of the Reaver Sergeant as the leader. I think most of the time you're going to want to take that as your leader. But that covers all the models they can take. So I guess really quick, we can look at their equipment, which is not amazing. So there's the grapnel launcher and the grav chute, which only work for Reavers. So I think you're really only going to have one Reaver most of the time, and it would be your leader. So if you have an extra equipment point left over, you can give them a grapnel launcher. If you have 3 extra left over, you can give them a grav chute. There's smoke grenades for 3 equipment points, which I actually really like. And there's frag and cracks, obviously. There's the 2 EP throwing knife, which I would say don't ever take. Honestly, it's just the only thing about it is it's like a 6-inch range. It's silent. It's damage 2/5, which is really weird. So you're really hoping you crit with this.
Yeah.
And that's it. The Purity Seal I would not really recommend on this team. But a lot of the time, I think a lot of people are going to just take crack grenades. But I think there is something to be said for smoke grenades on this team.
Okay.
So elite teams, I think, really want to be safe turn 1. And if they can come out of turn 1, keeping up on objective points and victory points and go into turn 2 pretty much unscathed without having lost a model or anything like that, that's a really good thing. So if you can load up on like 2, maybe even 3 smoke grenades and just forget about cracks, then you can use those smoke grenades to, throw them onto an objective, move onto that objective inside the smoke grenade so that you're totally safe, unless they can ignore obscurity, in which case don't do this. I think that smoke grenades on turn 1 especially have a lot of play just for like capping objectives and keeping your guys safe. And then after turn 1, your opponent is really on kind of like a timer to kill you because you're the elite team, you're the stronger, more killy team most of the time. So smoke grenades, I think, are very interesting. They also have shock grenades, which I would recommend you never, ever take. It's basically, you select an area within 6 inches of the guy with the shock grenade. And for each enemy operative within 2 inches of that point, you subtract 1 from the results if it's not visible, but basically you're rolling a 4-up. And on a 4-up, that operative subtracts 1 from their APL. If it wasn't for the fact that it was a 4-up, I think this would be a really good ability. But the fact that you're just coin flipping for 3 equipment points and you need to get within 6 inches, it's just not great, I guess. That's just kind of my take on it. I would avoid the shock grenades, but smoke grenades really, really interesting for this team in particular. And obviously crack grenades are good as well. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up their equipment. So I guess all that's left is to take a look at their faction tac ops, which unlike the Blooded, I think that the Phobos have pretty good options across the board almost. So there's Shock and Awe. So basically, you reveal it at the end of any turning point, and then at the end of any turning point, if friendly operatives control 1 or more objective markers that were controlled by enemy operatives at the start of that turning point, you score a victory point. And then the second bullet is if you do that again, you score a victory point. So basically, I think you reveal this at the start of turn 2, and then you try to take objectives away from your opponent, which is something you want to be doing anyway. I really like Shock and Awe. I think this is like, you're going to put this in your deck of 6 like every time. There's Saboteurs. So reveal this tac op in the target reveal step of the first turning point. And then starting with your opponent, you alternate placing one of your Saboteur tokens in the kill zone until 3 have been placed. And then each time a player places a Saboteur token, it must be touching a certain terrain feature more than 3 inches from the kill zone edges, more than 6 inches from your drop zone, and each of your other Saboteur tokens, and it must not be on a vantage point. So this is where that Saboteur action comes in that I was talking about earlier that all of your Phobos models can do. So once you do the Saboteur action on one of these Saboteur tokens, you remove the token. And if you've removed 2 of the tokens by the end of the game, you score a VP. And if you remove all 3, you score another VP. So yeah, that is about it. It's interesting. It's definitely not bad, especially because this is a 3 APL team, so they can easily be moving into situations and positions where they can do that action and score those victory points. And then there's guerrilla tactics, which is their third tac op. So you reveal this in the reveal tac op step of any turning point. And at the end of any turning point, if more enemy operatives were incapacitated than friendly operatives during that turn, and more than half of your operatives have a conceal order, you score 1 victory point. And the second bullet is if you achieve the first condition again, you get another. This one is hard. I think there's a lot of ways for guerrilla tactics to kind of go wrong. So, I mean, I would avoid it for the most part. But as far as shock and awe goes, that's an auto take, I think. And I think Saboteurs is close to being, I wouldn't say it's an auto take, but I think a lot of the time you can get away with, depending on the deployment and like the terrain setup. It's nice that they can't put it on vantage points. That's huge. I would definitely be taking shock and awe on Saboteurs most of the time. And unless you're against like a really kind of like weaker horde team, I would avoid guerrilla tactics most of the time. And as far as what archetype you want to take with this team, I like recon a lot. Infiltration is a little bit tougher than recon. But I do like, in some instances, if you're against like that kind of horde team again, which a lot of the top teams are horde teams, I think you can actually get away with seek and destroy. Just because you have against hordes, you have 3 decent options for faction tag ops, which means you can really get rid of the crappy ones. Like you can get rid of challenge, you can get rid of I guess you could, I don't know. I don't love Headhunter a lot of the time, and I don't love Deadly Marksman because there's a lot of conditions for Deadly Marksman, and Headhunter, they can easily hide their leader, which a lot of the time they're going to. But yeah, I think as long as you have good faction tac ops, Seek and Destroy isn't that bad. And Recon, I think, is great. And Infiltration is like, there's some good ones and there's some not great ones. I don't know. But either way, I think this team is not going to have any problems when it comes to tac ops just because they have a couple of good options already that are exclusive to them. So, yeah, I mean, Phobos are interesting. They have a lot of tools. They have a lot of weird stuff. And I think they're not going to be an easy team to play out of the gate. But they are going to be a team that I think has a pretty high skill ceiling that if you're playing them well, you can kind of go head to head with a lot of the top teams and at the very least give them a lot of trouble. So I mean, I don't know. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on for the Phobos? I kind of went on a rant there.
Yeah. So one thing that I did want to touch on was the Reaver ability. Let me just see if I can bring it up here. It's the Terror ability. So specifically the second bullet point for 1 AP, when determining control of an objective marker, that any friendly operatives that performed this action during this turning point are within range of treat enemy operatives total APL as being 1 less. Note that this is not a modifier. That seems like it would pair up really well with the shock and awe tac op. So that was just something that I wanted to point out.
Oh yeah, that is pretty interesting because you can kind of
you can sneak one. You can sneak an objective marker out from under your opponent without having to kill the model, really, for 1 AP. So that seems like a pretty cool play and a reason to include Reavers on your kill teams.
Yeah, it's nice that I think like most of the time. So because of the Omni Scrambler ability, I think a lot of the time you're gonna want to take at least 4 infiltrators,
Yeah.
just because I think having that ability is so strong. And I think a lot of the time you're going to want the Reaver Sergeant. So like you're going to want your leader to be a Reaver a lot of the time. It's going to give you a melee threat where the team otherwise doesn't have one, which is great. And it's going to I mean it's going to give you access to that terror ability. It's going to give you a 6-inch AP1 option that hits on 2s, which is really cool. The one bit of advice I will say about this team is outside of the fact that they are not easy to pick up and win with. I think if you're just getting started on Phobos, like you've just built your whole team and you haven't played them yet, you don't know how they play on the table very well. I would avoid using the Saboteur or the Minelayer. Not because I think they're bad, but specifically because I think if you're learning the team and getting used to all their rules, of which they have a lot of, um, the making the mines work and the demo stuff, it's just a whole other layer of like cognitive like load that you just have to worry about.
Right.
When you're learning a team, I would avoid using that model. The only auto takes I think that are on this team are um, the marksman, the Incursor marksman, which is most of the time the only Incursor I think you'll run. The veteran, who I think is really good, and the commsman.
How do you feel about the medic?
I like the medic almost always. I don't
Okay.
want to call it an auto take, but I think most of the time you're going to really like the medic. Um, the Reaver Sergeant is close to being an auto take, but I can see situations where you would prefer having another long range guy hitting on 2s, so like the infiltrator leader, maybe once in a while. And the like as far as the Saboteur goes, I think you take it against elite teams and not much else.
Okay.
The VOXBREAKER is maybe something you don't take a lot, just because it's a bit limiting and like when it can actually like do stuff. Um, and the Commsman, don't know if I already mentioned this, but I would take the Commsman just about every game. I think it just really expands your like action economy in a really positive way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think this team is they're going to be a tough nut to crack. They're very, very interesting. It's like for how bland they kind of looked, like when they announced this team, they're like weirdly one of the most interesting teams when you actually put them on the tabletop and play them. So if you've got the infiltrators and the incursors laying around, or if you're splitting the box with a friend, you know, give this team a run, because I think they are very, very interesting, and I actually think they're the better of the two teams in the box, like competitively speaking. But that's just me.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, thank you guys for watching our video here today. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you guys think of the new Phobos kill team down in the comments below. If there's anything that we missed, let us know. We want to kind of have a conversation with you guys. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Special shout out to the patrons for always supporting us. You guys are the best, and we hope to see you again in the next one.